Great. So in April of 2016, ACRS helped organize a conference here at EMU on the theme, Leading into the Common Good, an Anabaptist Perspective. Probably many of you were at that. Yes? Okay, quite a number. I thought there were a number of interesting presentations, some of which were here. I see Lee Snyder here. Some others gave presentations. So I can't choose favorites, but since Lee's here, but what I will say is, where are you, Lee? I saw you someplace.
Right there.
What I will say is that one that did stand out for me as particularly stimulating and provocative was one by Phil Wenger, where he talked about the interaction and the tensions between his Anabaptist values and running his restaurant chain. Now, being a former EMU prof, where we're supposed to always integrate Anabaptist values into the classroom and into our work, I was, and even aside from that, of course, I'm always interested in the kinds of questions that that being an Anabaptist, having one of the Anabaptist values, introduces. And so those questions have always been in front of my mind. And having worked in both for-profit and not-for-profit organizations, it's that intersection between clashing values or congruency of values. So, so what's distinctive, if anything, about a business or organization that's run by people who call themselves Anabaptist or Mennonite? What should be distinctive if it's not distinctive? So, we're delighted that as part of the Business and Econ Department's Longacre Endowed series, Phil graciously agreed to come to EMU for a series of events throughout the day today, and to explore further the kinds of questions he raised during the leadership conference. I asked Phil how he wants to be introduced, and so he sent something to me, and I'll read that in a second, but what struck me when I read that and his CV and compared that with his introduction he preferred, I observed that he has not lost that Anabaptist value of understatement and humility. That's a value I value. So here's what he suggested. Here's what he had to say. Phil took 7 years to complete a degree in liberal arts from EMU, drifting around with a wide range of interests. I was a slow starter too. Having, as some people near, having had a D in statistics when I was a college student under Gomer Lehman, who's here, but then having taught it when I come back here to teach. So we're all changed at different paces. By 27, Phil was living at home without a clear plan for a meaningful career. But his education and journey through life led him to start and grow a chain of restaurants in central Pennsylvania with over 600 employees at 20 locations at its peak. He used those restaurants as a platform to serve the community and embedded a brand promise that included creating community with customers and family with employees. Later he sold the restaurants and moved into a second career in service to the planet, working to protect precious natural lands threatened by development. He likes to call this kingdom work. You know, the kingdom's animals, plants, fungi, and so on. At the Lancaster County Conservancy, he helped focus their mission. The Conservancy has grown considerably, doubling its budget into adjacent counties. His story is fascinating as he relates his career choices to his Anabaptist roots and will share his lessons. Phil, welcome, and glad you could come and look forward to hearing you.
I don't see a clock in here anywhere, so I probably will have to pull this up. Can get wound up sometimes when I'm talking, and might have to end up cutting me off, depending on how this goes this morning. But it's a delight to be here at EMU. It's a wonderful day to be back in the Valley. I enjoyed very much driving down 81 seeing the beautiful mountains, and then this morning I ended up walking up the hill here and had my meditative moment up on top of the discipleship hill here. And I realized what a special place this is and how it really does feed your soul and attract your spirit. So all of you have chosen to grow old and retire in this community, and those of you who are making a decision about where you're going to do that, I affirm your decision, because I feel that great sense of calling and homecoming when I come here to this community. One of the things I learned, I don't know, was public speaking here at EMU. I learned it might have been Omer Eby, it might have been Hubert Pellman, but one of these guys always said, never ever start your conversation with a concern or an apology. In other words, it's the old, never let them see you sweat when you put too much salt in the meatloaf. But for me, I will tell you that this is quite an intimidating audience. And 2 weeks ago I was in California. I'm on a $15 billion board of a company out there, and we fired our CEO because of the Me Too movement. And there were 2 groups of board members, and we were having a huge conflict around this, and I never once felt intimidated. I never once felt that I was like in an audience where I couldn't speak my mind, and that I might not end up feeling a sense of confidence that I was right, and so on. But when I come here and I talk about Anabaptist values, I talk about faith, I talk about business, and I talk about the planet, I just get intimidated. So I wanted to get that on the table right away. And so that I can relax, and you can relax, and we can have fun here together. So I'm going to be wanting to engage with you on a couple of different issues today. One is a bit the same as we did at the conference, which we're going to talk about Anabaptist values, and we're going to talk about the challenges of operating a business in a capitalist model, and whether or not you can indeed be an Anabaptist businessman, or whether or not those terms are incongruous. And I will tell you right at the beginning that my conclusion is that they're incongruous. And as much as we try with our efforts at MEDA and all these other entities to try and do this, the values gap is almost too much to be able to do in that model. So we're going to tell that story in a little bit, but I sort of wanted you aware that that's the one thing we're going to cover today. The second thing for me is about this idea of kingdom care or creation care. You know, when my father went through Eastern Mennonite University and my grandfather founded this institution, evangelism was at the core of what Mennonites and the Christian community in North America was all about. He took that call, he went to Africa, he became a missionary, and evangelism was at that call. And sharing the good news about Jesus was really what we chose to do as Anabaptists, and that was the central call. I'm here today to propose a different theory about what the central call of Christians should be. And that is that our planet is in peril, that we as human beings and as Christians are not doing nearly enough to be evangelists around the issue of planet care, and that we need to really beef up where Robert Lehman started here, the whole sustainability movement, and we as Christians actually have a responsibility to care for this planet in a very much more intense kind of way than what we have up to this point. Amen. And I'm going to contrast that idea of evangelism as a central focus of following Jesus as opposed to creation care. So those are the 2 ideas I'm going to weave together today, and I'm going to do it by telling my story about my journey into each of those different areas and how that happened. And if we're fortunate about this, we'll end up then having some time and you can challenge me on either one of those basic propositions. Is that fair enough? So this story that I'm going to share with you about my life and my journey is a story that's yet being written. It doesn't have a conclusion. So we're going to walk through the first few chapters of this together, and then you're going to have to sort of help guide me to what the last chapter of my life here, or not the last chapter, but the last chapters of my life should be. So that's one of the things I want to do. So I was going to talk a little bit more about kingdom care right now, but I think I'm going to pass on that and save that till the end if we have time, because I get so fired up about the destruction of this planet, driving down here, coming down 81, seeing the warehouses, reading the statistics about the number of bird counts and the numbers of counts that are going down, habitat destruction, everything that's going. But that wasn't what you invited me to talk about today. So I'm going to save some of that for my afternoon lecture today. But I'm going to tell my story. I think many of you know it. You know, I was the 7th child of 8 children from a Mennonite missionary. I was, our family was as Mennonite as they come. You know, graduating from Eastern Mennonite, going and being missionaries and being service. And our family grew up with a full immersion in Anabaptist values. I can almost quote the tenets of Anabaptism for you. You know, we had the adult baptism issue. You know, we ended up having this idea that we don't ever hurt people. You know, the pacifism was core to our being. We ended up following Jesus, you know, and that was at the center. We had this simple living value. There was this separation of church and state. All of those things were embedded in me. And the devotions, when we would go and have breakfast and lunch and dinner, my dad read the scripture every single time before a meal when we gathered. And it was just remarkable how that sinks into you as a young person and becomes a part of who you are. And then I went to only Mennonite schools. You know, yeah, I was a missionary in Ethiopia and I was born there, but you know, when I came to the United States, I went to Locust Grove Mennonite School, I went to Lancaster Mennonite School, and then I went to Eastern Mennonite University. So you have to understand, this Anabaptist thing is a part of who I am, whether I want it to be or not. And so there were some of these Anabaptist values that were pretty intense, and I can remember several of them, and I want to share some of these stories with you. So in high school, I would have been a sophomore, we had a social studies teacher at Lancaster Mennonite High School, and he wore black every single day to the classroom. And he had a chalkboard in the corner, and every day he went to the newspaper and he read how many more people died in this war we call the Vietnam War. And he would put that up there, and he would always begin his class talking about the insanity of war. Very impressionable for a guy who's a sophomore in high school. I don't think the school really liked him because there were a lot of issues around his intensity in his anti-war perspective, but it really had a profound impact in my life. Another time, many of you might have known who came through Lancaster, Myron Dietz. He was sort of the absolute best teacher around Anabaptism. And one day he loaded us students up and he drove through the west end of Lancaster. And these are where all the big Victorian houses are. And you know, they've all got slate roofs and copper gutters, and they're big and they're beautiful and they're amazing, and all the rich people live there. And he taught me the term of blue bloods and what blue blood meant. And when you have blue blood, that means you inherited a lot of money and you use that money, you know, to live your lives, and you keep that money and you control it. And blue bloods were, from his perspective, very corrosive. They were, he believed that wealth leads to power, power leads to violence, and we should work with the powerless, and we should live our lives as an alternative to that. I remember telling this story the last time, but there was a mini-term between high school and college, and they shipped a bunch of us Lancaster Mennonite students up to Riften, New York, where there was a Hutterite community. And we spent 4 weeks there. We played a lot of sports, and it was a lot of fun, I can tell you, except they never kept score. Can't imagine that. They never kept score. So we would go play volleyball, and I would spike the ball, and I'd win a point, and nobody would keep score. And there were no winners and losers. And that made quite a substantial impression that we can go through life without having to keep score, without having to create winners and losers. So by the time I got to EMU, I was basically a full-blown Anabaptist socialist. I was. I was opposed to all things in authority. I really didn't like capitalism. I thought it was what was wrong and harmful for the world. This was a world where I thought that, you know, we were all meant to serve. And when I was here at EMU, you know, I edited the college paper. I wore a mouse star on my hat. I went to Washington, D.C. for the first year that they had their study service year. I think you call it something else now, but it was called the Washington Study Service Year. The only major paper I wrote in college was on servant leadership. And this idea that you can lead and you can serve, and those two being compatible, was clear in my mind. Being a business leader and service wasn't quite as clear. So, those were the times. I have so many fond memories of this place here. I got in a lot of trouble. I was a rabble rouser. But we looked at those big houses being built on the hill to the south. What do you call those houses, or what's that hill called?
Snob knob.
Snob Snob. Well, why did we as students call it Snob Snob? Well, it was because there was this perspective here at EMU that wealthy people somehow were separating themselves from the rest of us, and they just didn't have as high value in this kingdom work that we're supposed to be doing. So anyway, oh my, those were the days. So I was clearly headed toward one of those careers, where I'm going to be doing a life of service. My father was a preacher and a teacher. My siblings were all going to go off and become teachers and preachers themselves, and I was going to spend a life of service. And I like to think about the way EMU was. When my mother graduated from Eastern Mennonite University, there were really only women in a couple different majors. They were basically teachers, right? And they were nurses, okay? So, today women can do anything. They can have those careers. But in those days, when you graduated from Eastern Mennonite University, like in the late 70s and early 80s, you were pretty much wired to do community service, to do justice work, and to serve in the community. And that's the way I felt. Like I didn't have many other choices. So, what happened? How did I end up in this business? Today I like to talk about it. I said it at the last conference there that, today I basically am a member of the Hamilton Club, and I love to play poker. And I actually like to smoke cigars. I don't know, it's probably not a good thing. I hang out with a bunch of people right now who are very wealthy in the West End of Lancaster, and I have a lot of friends that I'm asking for money from all the time, and they actually like me. They think I'm one of those. And so, how did this Anabaptist socialist at EMU, get to this place that he likes to play poker and smoke cigars at the Hamilton Club and ask people for money? So let's think about this here a little bit. My life today is very, very different. What in the world happened to that EMU student? That Christ-centered socialist who claimed Anabaptist label with pride and viewed business basically as this winners and losers, and business was, you go out and do that. And so I really did leave EMU with this either-or scenario. Business was anti-Anabaptist. It used a different orientation. It valued wealth creation. It maximized power. It takes money from one person and gives it to another. And every business deal that I've participated in almost always has somebody who wins and somebody who loses. And that transaction, that economic transaction that takes place, whether you're shopping at Walmart, you want that good value, but Walmart employees are taking almost $8 billion of public support from the government because they don't pay enough for wages. We value that economic piece, but there's a winner and loser when you go to Walmart and buy that, hose for $4.99. That was created somewhere, but I'll get into that a little bit more later on. So, or this other perspective. Let me see where here. So in the meantime, I went to work for the church. So I was living in Washington, D.C. at that point. Some friends of mine bought a house in a very poor neighborhood over in Columbia Heights. And we rejected our parents' sort of model for economic prosperity, and we started a food co-op. This food co-op opened every weekend, and we sold healthy food in a very poor neighborhood where there were no choices but fast food. And I went to work for the Mennonites. I worked for Mennonite, it was Student and Young Adult Services. It was run by Mennonite Board of Missions. And I edited a magazine for students and young adults. And it was quite fun because I got to travel all through General Conference Mennonite land and learned all about JC Mennonites. And then, of course, I had my own instincts and knowledge about old Mennonites. And I really loved that job, but that job wasn't meant to be, because I came out during that period of time and the church ended my employment. And they decided I wasn't really going to be there for a life of service. So I ended up back living at home with a desire to serve, but no economic means to support myself. So I tried 2 different jobs, and let me describe each of them to you here a little bit, and you see if either of these fit jobs that you might have tried. I took a job selling. It was with a company that was a precursor to Xerox. And we would go out and we would sell these business machines and we would sell these service contracts. And every year, for about 3 years, I would hit my sales quotas and they would raise those. And before you know it, I realized that there were 50 people competing for one job, and I wasn't willing to do that kind of work. It was just soul-sucking work of sales. Then I went for a family-related business. I worked for a company called Greenleaf Enterprises, and I will tell you, they had 5 children. Every one of those children had a spouse, and while the business was successful, there was no way that I was going to be successful in that company, because it was family-owned, and every child got the manager jobs, and every child was going to be an owner. And so there's no future with that. So here now, I've had my life of service. I tried to work out in the market, and I tried to do these kinds of experiences, and nothing ever really clicked. So that's what ended up happening here, is I sort of fell backwards into being my own business owner. A buddy named Isaac, you probably heard the story. He was another gay student from EMU. He was studied in Europe, and it was like 5 years after I graduated, and he said, I think I'm going to move to Lancaster, and why don't we look around and see if we can find something that we could do together. And he came home. He did move to Lancaster. We shared an apartment, and he came home, and one day he said, there's a little donut shop for sale. We should buy it. $11,000. Donut shop, it was a rental. You know, these were the days when you could buy anything for anything. And so I didn't have any money. I had about $20,000 of college debt. You know, we all graduate with this debt these days. You know, we paid our own way through college, and how in the world was I going to start a business? So I went to my dad, and I said to Dad, you've helped each one of your children with a down payment on their first house when they got married. Guess what, Pop? I'm not getting married. Why don't you take that down payment and let me start a business with it? And you know, my father's a wise man. He said, okay, if you want to be foolish enough to take your down payment on your first house and put it into a restaurant, I'm going to support you in that. And he did. And it was quite a way to get started. So now I've got this restaurant, and I decided that I wanted to see if I could make this restaurant different than that capitalist model. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about that story. So we really, really, really tried hard. You know, first of all, I picked an industry that is challenging. Okay? Restaurants are notorious for paying low wages. They're considered sort of the modern day slaves in today's society. You know, they clean up after us, they chop and prepare our food, they work in a dangerous environment with a lot of flames and chemicals, and you know, we don't really value them very much as a society. In fact, we don't usually encourage our kids to go work there because they have to work when we all want to eat out. Right? So if we want to go out on Friday night, you know, there's a lot of folks going there. They have a lot of ink on their bodies. These are folks that don't go to college. In fact, these are folks that, you know, when we go through EMU, we talk about the value of higher education, we talk about the value of knowledge, but this is a whole group of human beings that for the most part, those of us who choose this as a career, they aren't valued by education, and they don't want to do this. But I thought if I could take those Anabaptist values, I could take this business and I could run it based on those. And so we really tried. You know, there was another missionary kid, Alan Jacobs. His dad was Don Jacobs, and he joined me. He started with me right when we first started this, and we decided immediately that we wanted to give free food to all of our employees. Why in the world, if I'm paying you to in those days it was $5 an hour, but if I'm paying you $5 an hour and you can't, and you're hungry, how are you going to be able to serve food to other people? I mean, that's instinctual, right? So if you want to work for me, you ought to have free food. You know, we decided we wanted to go ahead and create a family culture where we're dependent on each other, where we basically don't use the business culture. You know, we use a culture of we use decision making, where we share in decisions. We wanted to offer health insurance. Most restaurants in the 80s and 90s and even 2000 would set 40 hours a week as the minimum to get health insurance, and then they would schedule all of their employees at 35 hours because they wanted to avoid taking responsibility for the employees who work for them. At Isaac's, we set the minimum at 25 hours. We said if you work 25 hours a week and you have to care for your family, you have to put them on the bus in the morning and be there when they come home and work our peak time over lunch, you should be able to have health insurance. And we worked this. I mean, we tried going green before green was cool. I built a restaurant downtown Lancaster. We spent about 15% more on all recycled materials, on green, no rainforest hardwoods, on all the materials that were cool. And I put up a big green flamingo and launched a website, Green Flamingo and everything else. We tried that. We had this brand promise. But I will tell you, the brand promise was that we're going to be community with each other. But the tension was too great. I mean, this restaurant was around for a long period of time. The easy stuff was like forgiving an employee. I had a bookkeeper who came to me and confessed that for 8 years she'd been stealing money. Okay? She confessed it in a fit of tears, and she came to me, and I was able to forgive her. She offered restitution, and she worked for me for another 20 years. We could do that. Now, there's an Anabaptist value put in place. Every other company put all kinds of controls in place, wanted to fire employees, and we fired a lot of employees for stealing. But because she came to me and confessed, there was this need and willingness to forgive. But those were the easy kinds of things. The hard stuff was when there was an economic downturn, and we had borrowed money, and the banks weren't happy. And they said, there's nobody but you to bring this bottom line back into a level that we're happy with. So now I'm separating people from employment, laying them off without cause. There are mortgages and car payments that aren't going to be made. I'm ending up destroying people's lives. You know, that's not very Anabaptist, okay? I still, had to survive with the company. I mean, there was all of these kinds of experiences. And I found that, in business, you swim with the sharks. And, everybody wants to get one over on you, and they want to make a little more than you want to make. And so the competition in our industry, in the restaurant industry, with the chain restaurants, was fierce. I couldn't practice Anabaptist values and be successful anymore. I simply couldn't do it. It was too difficult, so I needed to sort of fight back, and I would try hard. I used to tell my team, we're not going to pound the last ounce of money out of this deal. We want to stay friends. And my people would tell me, why do you pay people to stop kicking you all the time? But that's what I would do. I would literally pay people to stop kicking me because I wouldn't want to go get a lawyer. I wouldn't want to fight. I wouldn't want to create that win-win. So anyway. The other thing that happened was that I started changing. I started hanging out with a lot of other business owners. What those business owners like to do, they like to talk about personal responsibility. Every one of us is responsible for our own lives, right? This is our American culture. We're not interdependent on each other. It's like you're responsible for your checkbook and you're responsible for your life. And if you see somebody, like I did downtown Harrisonburg last night, who was headed over to the shelter at the Mission, and he was asking me for money, we say, that's his problem, that's not my problem. But I started to adopt that sort of mentality. I sort of started to think about this. And I had built this 20 restaurants, and things had changed. I had changed, and the company now wasn't able to create this community of culture. we really were in a competitive dog-eat-dog world, and we were changing as a company. Our employee satisfaction surveys went down, our turnover went up. I was struggling to keep the restaurant relevant after all these years. And this big experiment that I tried to run basically a business with Anabaptist values was beginning to fail. And the tension between practicing the Anabaptist businesses, values, and running a business got to me. And I needed to stop doing it because it wasn't who I was and what I was doing. And so I took some time off. I thought maybe if I hire somebody else to run the company for me and I go and get my head screwed on, figure this out, maybe we could get somewhere. And so that's what I did. I took a couple years off. I bought a little fishing shack over along the river. I worked with my hands for a couple of years. And I sort of just waited to see what would be the best thing for the next stage of my life. And it took me a while to sort of figure this out, but I can tell you today, when I think about running a business, I have exactly zero desire to do that. It's really hard. Now, I'm not talking about taking business values and working for a nonprofit. I'm not talking about the kinds of things you can do, but if you're going to run a business where there's ownership, there's debt, there's a need to make a ton of money, and to have your life work like that, for me, I couldn't bring those two together in a way, even after 25 years of trying to bring those together. So, I decided to switch careers, and I've done that successfully now. I made a decision that they're looking around the community for something to do, that I really wanted to take my leadership skills and I wanted to put them to an organization that really was focused on the community and doing good. And that's how I ended up over at the Lancaster County Conservancy. And I want to talk about that. So now my job is very different. It's very different. I've got to convince people, and I do a lot of public speaking around this, that the planet is in peril and that we have got to change the way that we do business, and we've got to save it. And so I am now this nonprofit leader. I'm begging for money, and it turns out that I'm really, really good at it. And what I've discovered is that wealthy people care about this planet too. In fact, the planet is the one place that we come together as Christians, as wealthy people, as Anabaptists, and can come together. And if you're authentic with wealthy people and you engage them around the issues that matter, you can have a dramatic impact. So anyway, that's where I'm at. So I'm still playing poker and smoking cigars at the Hamilton Club, and this was a bit of an aha moment for me, that I didn't necessarily need to sell everything I could and go live like a pauper, but I could spend the time that I did in business building out the important relationships in the community that I could then capitalize on those relationships to come back and do the work that I'm doing right now. So for me, practicing leadership in a faithful way meant that I did find a lot of personal satisfaction, working for a nonprofit. And for me, am I going to sell everything and give it away and live in poverty, live a simple life? Probably not, as we write this next chapter in my life. I have a spouse of 32 years. When we stay in a hotel room, we don't like to share the bathroom. We like to have our own bathroom. We like to go out to eat, and we enjoy the socializing and company, and you need to have means in order to do that. So I'm not here to say that money and being responsible is a bad thing. I'm just saying that for me, the idea that you spend your life career generating wealth in a for-profit model is not sustainable for the soul. So I remember saying to my father when we were little that I want to do this huge capitalist experiment. I did it. And I'm done. I'm finished with it. And that we have to do it differently. So when it comes to my conclusion on that point, I think it's very hard to be an Anabaptist and a business leader. And I know we talk about the B Corps, so we go out and we spend a lot of energy trying to tell companies they have to be responsible. And we spend a lot of time at META, justifying generating our wealth because we can give it out to help others in the community. But the truth of the matter is they are separate kingdoms, and we shouldn't try and mash them together into one. And if we're going to work back and forth together, it's going to have to be done without really calling the business an Anabaptist business, because it has debt, it's got wealth, it's got risk, and in the way that we do it today, it doesn't work, at least for me. So that's my one conclusion I wanted to say. So anyway, that's that. So let's jump over to the environment here just a little bit. Do I have a couple more minutes, or am I almost out of time? 8:09.
No, go ahead.
So you folks already know this, but I was delighted this morning to see the sustainability efforts up here, the less mowing lawn, the meadows that you planted. You know, we are destroying this planet. Lancaster County particularly is under siege. We're going to have 135,000 people move to Lancaster County in the next 25 years. We're the fastest growing county in Lancaster, except for Montrose County, which is a fracking county, and it has 4,000, and they're bringing in 4,000 workers, so it's going to double in size. But Lancaster County is the fastest growing county in Lancaster. And you know, we've got this amazing landscape. We've got this river gorge called the Susquehanna. We have these beautiful farms, and you know, it's turning into a suburb of Philadelphia and Baltimore. And we are destroying our planet. We're taking that land and we're populating it and we're putting up more houses and development. And when we do that, we destroy the landscape. We destroy all that beautiful biodiversity. And we just keep doing it as humans over and over and over again. And you know, I've learned that this human activity and the destruction of habitat is just so insidious and ongoing and happening at such a rapid pace. And you know, we hear all of these warnings about global warming, and we hear about, you know, the planet warming up, and you know, all the carbon challenges we have with the environment and everything else. And I will tell you that I have come to personalize and understand this, you know, and to really decide that I am going to do something about that for the last chapter of my life. And so it's been fascinating trying to apply this in Lancaster County. Here's an interesting thing that happens. We have very, very conservative people who support the Conservancy in a really large way. And we have tons of tree huggers, you know, like your kids. And these folks that are out there who really, really believe that they can do their individual part to change and save the world. And what I have seen happen at the Conservancy is we bring both of those together. So I'm going to tell you a little story. So Trump is president, right? And he is making a decision whether he's going to pull out of the Paris Climate Treaty. So this is where all the countries of the world came together. They all decided they're going to lower the amount of carbon that they're emitting into the environment. We're going to all work together, and the U.S. was seen as a leader of that, and Obama went over there, negotiated this, got all the countries of the world. And it was a big darn deal, okay? And so Trump comes in as president, and he is obviously America first, and he says, I don't know if I'm going to do this. I may or may not stay in the climate treaty. So my whole staff is gathered around the monitors as we're streaming the live press conference where he is going to announce this. And he announces, U.S. is going to pull out. He says we're already doing our share. We're just not going to participate. You know, we're going to keep doing it, but we're just not going to be a part of the whole global approach to lowering climate change. My staff, the people I work with, were absolutely incensed. And so I went over to my computer and I wrote a message to our supporters about our disappointment in Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Treaty. It said, it goes out to 2,800 supporters. I've got 2,800 emails. These are people that like us, support us. You would have thought I touched off a whirlwind. There was so much hate stuff coming back at me for saying that Trump should not have pulled out of this climate. I was shocked how many conservative people, hunters, fishermen, farmers, think that what happens locally is important, but what happens over there in Paris, that there's just this huge disconnect. And so I got all this angry hate mail. I mean, supporters saying, I've written you checks forever, but it's used, you know, speak out against Trump. Guess what happens? You know, we're not going to support you anymore. So I learned a valuable lesson. When you want to talk about conservation and you want to talk about saving nature, keep it local. Keep it the habitat destruction in your backyard. Talk about the stream down at the end and the fact that we want to clean that stream. And don't talk about those global things. So I just learned that because everybody, conservatives, Democrats, and Republicans, care about the air they breathe, and they don't think we ought to be polluting the air. They really don't. You know, you can ask any Republican, even the ones who drive a great big GMC Yukon, you know, do you think it's really good to be able to be polluting the air? And they would say, no, I want clean air for my kids. And every single person, Democrats and Republicans, both want clean water. They understand that we've mucked up our waterways, that we've basically harmed the environment by putting so much chemicals on our lawns and all these kinds of things. And you ask them, do you want clean streams? Would you like to have trout back where you can actually fish in the stream down in the meadow that, you know, that you couldn't fish? And they all say yes. And so for me in the conservation movement, and I know I'm way off topic here, and I apologize for that, but I have found you've got to keep it local. And you've got to be a missionary to the people on either side of you, your neighbors, you know, your people there. And, you know, I'm going to stay for the Lancaster County Conservancy out of national politics because I have too many conservative supporters. And, you know, the environment is the one place that we end up coming together. So for me, the environment, I made this case about evangelism and the environment later. I'm not a scholar and I haven't really spent a lot of time studying this, but I know that the evangelical fervor that my father felt for bringing people to Christ is very comparable to the fervor that I feel about kingdom care. And so I'm wrestling, and maybe you could help me in this conversation here today about how we can bring those two together. And it's not an either or, it can be a both and I'm going to try and do both. But, you know, the environment is the one place that I feel like, you know, we should come together. You know, we divide ourselves out on the abortion issue as Anabaptists. You know, we definitely have challenges around that. We divide ourselves out on, you know, gay people in the church and sexual orientation and stuff. And we divide ourselves out on all these different issues where we can't come together. But this one issue of the birds and the decline of birds. Do you know backyard birds, the birds counts they do in North America, have gone down 1 billion birds in the last 20 years? We still see the birds at our feeders, so we think there's not a problem. But we are destroying their habitat. I walked around here, I saw all kinds of non-native plants. I see those non-native plants taking over, and you know what? Non-native plants don't have any insects, and the birds don't eat any of those insects, and the birds go away. Do you want beautiful landscaping, or do you want bird food? And you have to decide. And so, I'm getting off topic here anyway. Let's see if I had a conclusion here. So, it says conclusion over. So being faithful to Anabaptist values is easy as an environmentalist, and it's almost impossible as a capitalist. That's my conclusion.
So you get a sense of why I thought Phil's talk 2 years ago at the conference was particularly provocative and stimulating. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
So we usually have a Q&A, as you know. We usually have a Q&A after each person speaks at these Monday morning gatherings. We want to continue that, but if possible, I'd like to make this more of a conversation rather than just a Q&A. And I'm not quite sure how to do that, except, you know, maybe kind of follow-up questions from the one you asked. Because usually, you know, you ask a question, they answer, you go on to the next question. As opposed to, I don't know, without dominating. Okay, we don't want one issue dominating the rest of the morning. So maybe in that sense, if we can do that. But before we start doing that, let me just do a quick poll here. How many of you have owned a business? Okay, that's about half of you. How many of you have worked in a for-profit business? Okay. I guess the rest of you have been in a not-for-profit or non-profit organization. So I think one of the things I heard him say, of course, is that there's a particular challenge in a for-profit operation and maintain Anabaptist values. So maybe with that challenge, we could start with those who own their business. Is what he said congruent with your experience? Jim Smucker.
I figured Jim would be the one. Hi, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing good, Phil.
I know this message just doesn't align with what you're trying to do here at EMU with business majors, but I'm happy to hear your perspective on this, because Jim and I worked together, and he actually wrote his PhD on my company, so we have a little history together here.
That's what I wanted to remind you, if you remember, that I did a lot of my dissertation research at your restaurants back in 2000.
Can you repeat the question?
Louder.
Okay.
Give this man a mic.
So if we don't have a mic, since Marty King was let go, we no longer have the facility of his operations, videoing, and the mic. So you have to speak loudly, and we'll repeat the questions for all of you.
I'm glad you concluded that it's almost impossible. I agree we're in late capitalism for many reasons. The environment, one of the prime reasons. But I think maybe you're underestimating the value that good work has for people. When someone loses their job, or on the contrary, when someone has a really good work that they're energized by, the value that brings to them and their families. So I interviewed over 15 of your employees back in 2000, frontline employees, servers, hostesses, etc. And what they told me, and I still have the notes if you're interested, what they told me about the impact that working with Isaac's had on their lives was significant. And so life is full of paradox and ambiguity, and being an entrepreneur certainly has much of that. But good work means a lot to people. And frankly, there's a lot of our brothers and sisters, media and business related, that provide, I'll say it here, better, more fulfilling work than what some of our church institutions do. And so business people can lead the way in that perspective and helping to provide good work, which I believe has tremendous value for the world today. And when they are able to work at places that have values like you had, Phil, what you did with health insurance, unprecedented, unparalleled. It always made me feel so guilty being in the same business that I wasn't creative enough to do the same thing. So I think maybe you underestimate a bit that perspective and what you did for those 500-600 employees. So I'd be glad for any comment on that. I think you live in a world of paradox when you are in business. And I can understand your frustration. I made the same move. Frankly, I was frustrated with it for some of the same reasons you are. But I have lots of, and I know you do, lots of respect for those who are still working at it every day.
So Jim was basically saying that the employees that worked at Isaac's experienced that culture and had a richer life because of it, and that there was a lot of good that happened in business. And then he went on to say that in other businesses in this community, they actually do a lot more good in how they relate to their employees and others than maybe even some of our Christian businesses. So nonprofit community, we say, well, you're not working for profit, you're working for the community. That I was saying that might be a higher calling. And he's saying there is a higher calling in business, and doing it the right way with the right values has a lot of worth. I think I summarized that. But for those of you who asked me to summarize it, so I don't disagree. I am a study group of one, me, and I only have my own perspective and my own experience. So I haven't studied this. I haven't really looked at it. I just know for me, the challenges of calling myself an Anabaptist or a Christian and trying to make it work in the capitalist world of for-profit was not satisfying my soul. I don't know how to explain it. The wealth that was generated is nice. I mean, you were able to give it away, and you were able to generate it. But I never was driven by wealth that most people who are in this group of businesses, and they aren't like the little mom and pop businesses where you're just trying to pay the bills, but driven by wealth. And so I've often been criticized by some of my business friends for not being more motivated by wealth. Isaacs could have franchised, and we could have gone big. Isaacs could have brought in, and I had several opportunities where people came to me with money and wanted to invest in Isaacs and grow it a lot more. And in both cases, I said my values I wanted to keep under control. I wanted to shape it. I didn't want to work for investors. And so I wasn't as successful as many business people are, where they go big time and they make tons and tons of money. And so, I sort of am a failed businessman, if you really think about it. I mean, I ran this restaurant chain, I grew it, but I sold it, but I didn't make a ton of money. I mean, I made enough to be able to retire on and feel comfortable. But there are some business people who look at me and say, you failed. And then as a Christian who's trying to find a life of service, I feel like I sort of failed over there too, because I couldn't do that in my business. And so, I hear you, Jim.
Do you want to come back, Jim?
If you want me to.
Yeah.
No, not necessarily. I think I pretty much knew Phil's answer, but I just wanted to point out that you did maybe more good than what you realized, Phil.
Thank you.
Dave Brubaker.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Great to have you back on campus. I want to agree with your basic statement that it's very difficult to combine Anabaptist values and the for-profit world, but I don't think you went broadly enough, because I think the same critique applies to all organizations, nonprofit, faith-based congregations. I've consulted with over 100 in the last 30 years, and they also face exactly the same issues that you face. They've had to lay people off, as we have on this campus. They've struggled to hold together their value of healthcare. Many congregations unable to provide it to their own leaders. So I think we have to acknowledge every organization is now in a late capitalist world, and I'm not sure that the pressures on for-profit are unique from the pressures on nonprofit organizations. So I'd welcome your response to that. I also want to tell people that at noon today in this room, we will be having a Q&A time with Phil, and so you're welcome to come and have more interaction with him. Bring your own lunch or buy it here.
So he's saying the challenges that for-profit companies have are basically the same as nonprofit companies, and we can take Anabaptist values and struggle with them. So for those of you who couldn't hear him say, we lay off people in places like EMU. We have churches who can't provide health insurance for their pastors and their families. And we make very difficult decisions as nonprofits, and we actually fight a lot, and we fight even unfair nonprofits. And so the challenges that he was saying I'm having at Isaacs in struggling to live Anabaptist values in the business enterprise are probably the same that I struggle with over in the nonprofit world. And he has a very good point there as I think about that, because when I came to the Conservancy, it was an organization that was lost, and it was not functional. And within the first year of being there, I had replaced 2/3 of the employees, because we had a mission, we had a focus, and we simply couldn't not function. And so he's right to some extent, that the challenges are the same. It's just when you're motivated by mission, it's entirely different than when you're motivated by wealth generation. And I would argue that mission-driven organizations are healthier for our soul and better for us spiritually than wealth-driven organizations. So I'll just leave it at that.
So maybe that would lead to the question, can for-profit organizations be mission-driven?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure. They all have mission statements. I mean, they all have mission statements. I mean, they do. They want to, make the world a more beautiful place, or, as Nike says, just go do it. But I don't know.
Well, that's wordplay. I mean, yeah. Could
So-
I ask a question? I feel this is sort of a topic that's very, very important.
Mike,
Dear to my
Mike,
heart.
Cal,
I-
use the mic. Go to the mic. You're the right height.
What's that?
Come up here.
Very short. I want everything I say. I want to be in support. I am in support of most of what Bill has said. So I want to simply affirm you and really bless you with, especially the conclusion on the environment. The environment is the critical arbiter of everything, including capitalism and socialism and everything. It's the point of no return, they say now, is about 15 years away. And everything has to be done in concordance with that idea. Now, I was going to ask you, how widely spread is this attitude or this orientation that you have been presenting? Does the rank and file Anabaptist community wrestle with this question? What's your empirical evidence?
I have no empirical evidence. I only have my own college education at Eastern Mennonite University. And it really, really shaped this perspective along with a family set of values that place wealth generation at the lowest of worthwhile careers. And so in my own family, and I can speak to this, you know, I have siblings that go off and do amazing things in the church and have been leaders in this institution. And I always had this restaurant chain, and my family, I believe, my father, viewed my activities as less worthwhile. I felt it. You know, we'd go around and tell stories at the holidays, and everybody would explain what they're doing, and everybody was like celebrating, and then I'd talk about the business. So it was considered lower on the tier of acceptable behavior. So this is my family, and this is my education at EMU. So that's all.
I wasn't challenging you, I was asking you just this is very significant information here. I'm just really told you, but do have a couple of things I want to say in conjunction with this. Herald Press put out a book called Entrepreneurs in the Faith Community, Profiles of Mennonites in Business, and they got carried away with the idea, and they over-published by a couple of thousand. So this morning I'm feeling really generous and concerned about the poor among you. So I have 6 copies of this. And then for the more empirically interested people who want to know more about this, it so happens that there's a book available here, still on in press, Mennonite Entrepreneurs, put up by Johns Hopkins. I interviewed 100 entrepreneurs across Canada and the United States when I was still a professor at Conrad Grable. So I got sort of a discussion here of how entrepreneurs confront these very issues. So I'm not trying to sell these books here, I'm just trying to tell you that this kind of stuff is available. There is some empirical evidence that this conflict is real, and you wouldn't believe it, but this conflict comes out very strongly that some of these Anabaptist entrepreneurs are more Anabaptist than you and I are. And I'm going to close with this thing here. The first chapter in this book is the story of Jacob A. Shank. You know who he is?
Yeah.
Jacob A. Shank, his life still lives in these buildings here, and so on and so on and so on. Well, you know what he did? He developed the the poultry industry, and he was very successful at the beginning of an industry, so that explains why he was successful and could be an Anabaptist. I think there's some interesting stuff there. Jacob A. Shank gave 90% of his net income to the church. And at first, Lucy was his worst, no, I shouldn't say this word, was his most active contestant. Said, Jacob, we can't live like this. But it turned out that they were able to do it. So, in my estimation, Jacob A. Shank is one of the most memorable and admirable people that I know. I didn't know him personally, but I saw his books. I think I'm the last person who saw the books that Lucy let me see. Well, it's actually true that he gave 90% to the church. I'm sorry for this, but I have heard everything here plus more.
That just prompted a funny thought for me because, you know, what, at the Conservancy, what keeps me up at night is that I live on grants and contributed income, and both of those two can go away tomorrow. Government changes, I stop getting government grants, another recession like 2008 comes along, and you guys slap your wallet shut, and I don't have any charitable income. And so I have decided that we're going to become a business, and we're going to make earned income. So we have a whole group dedicated to this. I'm out getting investors, but we're going to run the business on the inside of the nonprofit. Okay, so we're going to generate lots of income on the nonprofit side so that we can advance our mission. What he's talking about is making the income on the for-profit side and giving it all back. And so there's just, you know, there's just two different models there, and both of them have a lot of validity, and I don't think you should hear me saying that you shouldn't. Do your Anabaptist values in whatever context you have. I think it's the wealth that is the most corrosive, and so therefore, you know, that choice to give money away, to use your businesses to do good and be philanthropic is very important. And people who've generated a lot of wealth have done that. I'm going to save this for my afternoon presentation, but we're going to talk a little bit about Bill Gates and Mother Teresa. And we're going to see which one in this room you admire more. And we're going to do that this afternoon at 4 o'clock.
Just a quick comment on Jacob Schenck, who gave 90% of his income. Some would argue it's not how much you give, it's how much you have left over. So Bill Gates can give a lot of money, 90%, and still have tons left over. That's the context of that comment. I'm wondering about the individual proprietorships. Those of you who at one time maybe had your own construction company, maybe had a couple of employees, or that kind of a thing. What's your response to Phil's perspective from you all?
I will speak as a son of a business owner. My family had a fairly humble auto repair garage in eastern Iowa. It's now in its 3rd generation, and it's 94 years old. My parents weren't about wealth building. The language I would think of critically now would be wellness. They created a business to fulfill the modest dreams that they had, to be married, to craft the life that they wanted in their marriage, to adopt 2 children, to live close to their siblings, but that had dollars and cents tied to it. Profits were reinvested in tools and equipment. The idea was to live without debt. Yeah, I guess the humbling point and the challenge of capitalism that I've had over the years is taking that what is enough thing where my parents so consistently reinvested in their employees, in healthcare, in just trying to build a business that may try to, in part for me, is a place I go back to when I'm looking for a constructive dialectic of the 2 tensions of your life themes. Capitalism that is constructively regenerative and healthy and wellness building to employees and life so that they can authentically participate, and a balance sheet that works together, and conservancy work about the preservation of the environment. So what is the constructive dialectic of regenerative capitalism that isn't so disruptively extractive of life and soul and spirit and the earth, and a constructive regenerative conservatism of the environment and environmentalism? I mean, that's what I think my parents humbly were looking for, to do as little harm as possible, and to just build a humble life that was rooted in an Anabaptist value that still assumed generation to generation. They weren't rushing to see Jesus and using the earth as a means to an end and dominion. They found some sort of humble harmonic balance without even trying. So what's my point here? I'm looking for a constructive dialectic of regenerative capitalism that doesn't extract and an environmentalism that can heal, and maybe we can do it. But right now it seems profoundly incompatible.
Yeah, I can't really respond. I can back to this sort of focus group of one and can just talk about energy and what is life-giving and what provides energy and what gives you joy and satisfaction as an individual. And in the way that I'm wired, in the way that I'm